and welcome you all on behalf of CUPS, the College of Urban Planning PhD Students Organization, and the Great Cities Institute, who have so generously hosted us today and provided the delicious sandwiches you're enjoying. If you haven't had one, please go get one. Now I'd like to introduce Douglas Farr, who's an architect, urbanist, author, and passionate advocate for sustainable design thinking and sustainability as a way of urban planning. Doug heads Farr Associates, a Chicago-based firm that plans and designs lovable, I like that word in there, Doug, aspirational buildings and places. A native Detroiter, Doug's co-chaired the development of LEED ND and has served on the boards of urban sustainability organizations, including the Congress for New Urbanism, Bioregional Eco Districts, and Elevate Energy. His best-selling first book is called Sustainable Urbanism, Urban Design with Nature, and that book helps shift the focus of urban sustainability from the standalone building to the high-performance neighborhood. Now Doug returns with Sustainable Nation, Urban Design Patterns for the Future, in which he seeks to move the conversation even further and faster forward. Doug proposes more than 70 specific aspirational urban design patterns. We may not touch on all of those today, but that's a pretty daunting list, each of which provides guidance on a key aspect of a neighborhood, and all of which can be immediately applied. Doug is an architecture graduate at University of Michigan and Columbia University, and in 2017, hello, happy Friday. Readers named him one of the 100 most influential urbanists of all time. Thank you so much for joining us today, Doug, and I turn this over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How we doing? That was a great and brief introduction. Thank you for that. So glad to be back at USC, and I taught here a couple years ago, about 3-4 years ago, was it? A course called Sustainable Design Boot Camp. Anybody hear about it? Hope there's a reputation around it because it was bold and audacious. So anyway, so glad to talk to you about Sustainable Nation today. It is relevant, I think, to understanding current planning practice, how to build sustainable cities, and has many, many applications. I think of it as the Swiss Army knife of planning books. So you'll need to all ask for it for your holiday gift in 2018 this year. And if you do, we'll arrange just signing and all that kind of stuff. So, but the work of planners, I think, is captured nicely in this Wes Jackson quote: "If your life's work can be accomplished in your lifetime, you're not thinking big enough." And I've had the pleasure, LEED ND being maybe a prime example of being one small corner of the world of being able to be highly influential. So that was the first ever national standard to certify the sustainability of places. And I thought surely someone smarter, better financed from a larger organization would have done that already. No, me. So just to say, your dreams can be realized, and they're all kind of part of a multi-generational push. So Farr Associates, this is our sort of timeline of work. Above the line are building through design, below the line plans and codes we've written and adopted. Good afternoon. So we've been in business about 25 years, one human generation. And I asked this question of our practice and of myself: are we making the progress we'd like to make at the pace we'd like to make it? So if there's kind of one word that summarizes what this book is about that I think planning doesn't address much, it's time. How long things take. So that's, and how can we speed them up? So just to frame our practice, this is a plan we did in 1999 that I'm very proud of, Uptown Normal, Illinois, if you've ever been there. When your town is called Normal, you have to try harder. So they built a spectacular $300 million and counting downtown. This is the kind of iconic image of it. LEED ND certified national leader in sustainability, a place called Normal. And it was chosen as the best new civic space in America in 2011 by our favorite unit of government, the US EPA, represented by Chris Joy today. So, and then this house you may have seen on the north side in the Ravenswood neighborhood, the Yanel Net Zero Energy House, which for a month in the summer of 2010 was the greenest house in America. So we've got national firsts in planning and in building. So all about sustainability. Now this map is hard to see, but this is the kind of thing that gets me asking these questions about time. This is a map of the state of Florida. You can sort of see the faint blue outline. This is a map about a kind of long into the future, what portion of Florida will still be above water. So the brown stuff you see there is what remains. So anybody that has family or relatives in Miami, sell your real estate soon, right? So this to happen? Are we on this trajectory? Can we make change fast enough? And much closer to home is this graphic, which we use in our architecture practice, which comes from EPA data channeled through the Union Concerned Scientists, Environmental Defense Fund, somebody like that. And it shows basically how the climate of Illinois is on track to become the climate of West Texas in 80 years. And so we're already, 20 years into it. So the climate of Illinois is now sort of like that of what is that, Kentucky and Tennessee. So this is happening. I'm not happy about it. I'm not celebrating it. But when we design buildings, which are meant to be very climate specific, the quite reasonable question, once you've seen the chart, is which climate should I be designing for? And it has to do with how long the building's going to last. If it's a 100-year building, it's got to be both Chicago and Dallas. So welcome to architecture practice in the 21st century. So, but I want to slow this down. I want this to not happen. So that is the thing that got us asking this question: how long does change take? Can we make the changes we want to make fast enough? And when you think about planning documents, planning practice, I would say most of them are pitched to achieve their outcomes eventually. Not on a schedule, but someday. Or maybe never, but someday. There's no sort of fixed target, there's no deadline to it, and I think that's maybe the insight that climate change has given me, is we all have a collective deadline. I mean, we're going to blow through a bunch of them that we wish we had, but it never goes away. So how can planning be put on a timeline? So this way of thinking was inspired in part by this graphic from Bloomberg News, and it appeared in the New York Times about 5 years ago. If you can't see the x-axis, on the left is 1787, on the right is today, and then there's a faint line here showing the number of states in the United States, over time. And so the more vertical the line is, the more states have adopted laws in support of that. So these are legal issues. The longest one here is Loving versus Virginia, which is interracial marriage, which took 180 years to solve, to get resolved, to make interracial marriage federally legal. So that's 7 human generations. So flip to the other side, Obergefell versus Hodges is legalizing same-sex marriage, which took about 10 years. So 180 years when you started, 200 years ago, 10 years now. So the pace of change does seem to be picking up. But this sort of tracking and detailed timeline was incredibly inspiring to me. Those of you who follow the work of the United Nations and the Millennium Development Goals as planners, this is stuff you should be like totally geeked about, because it's a case where planning yields the intended results at an amazing clip. So the topic I'm going to talk about is just number 1 on the upper left, which is in 1990, the UN set targets to reduce global poverty and hunger, which then ran at 47% of all people alive. So almost half the planet was either poor or hungry. In 1990, 25 years later, it had gone down to 14%. So we can appreciate some of that was the industrialization of China and India and all those kinds of things, but it was an intentional plan, and planning succeeded by reducing poverty and hunger by basically 1/3 of the world's population. So things continue to improve. Planning's a big part of it, but can we go faster? So this is those of you who own or will own the book, which is all of you here. When you get your book, you go to page XB, and you'll see this history of civilization. And this seems kind of whack, but I think those of us who work at bettering society and providing for the future, I mean, isn't planning all about the future? Should be thinking a lot about time. So this is a diagram that says a couple historians settled on this idea that around 3100 BCE, Mesopotamia and Sumeria had the 5 or 6 elements of civilization: rule of law, written and spoken language, currency, infrastructure, governance, and I think maybe the 6th one was architecture, but maybe I'm just wishing it were architecture, I'm not quite sure. So we define that as generation 0, and then counting forward in 25-year bits. You get Egypt as generation 24 in the civilized history of civilization, Athens 104, Rome 122, and so on. We're in 204. So when you collapse the history of humanity and say civilization had a start date, we're only 204 generations into it, which is not that much. You think ancient history, but 204 generations generations is pretty darn short. And then we expand for this chart the carbon era because of a real focus on carbon, CO2, and the like. In the book, we researched these three trends relevant to our practice: sprawl, obesity, and CO2, to just understand what it would take to sort of reverse these trends and put them on a timeline. So sprawl is the first one. Do I need to define sprawl for anybody? There's probably a course on it. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you for keeping us honest. So sprawl is a kind of vernacular that I believe refers to the idea of auto-dependent land use. It's places you have to drive a car, places that are optimized around the car rather than the pedestrian. Right? Sprawl. And it tends to be associated with post-war America. And it looks kind of like this from the air. Like the streets don't connect. Everything's a little kind of pod on its own line. One of the stats that we cite in the book is that only 3% of land in America has been urbanized, settled for permanent settlements. So it's not a lot of land, but of the land we've settled, 6 out of 7 neighborhoods in America are auto-dependent. So we totally screwed that up. And one of the things that seems to be true is that land subdivision is nearly permanent. Our friend Ellen Dunham Jones, if you know her book on retrofitting suburbia, keeps a database of the number of suburban retrofit projects and believes that there are fewer than 5 cul-de-sac subdivisions. Cul-de-sacs are these little lollipops that have ever been reversed. So there's hundreds of thousands created, 5 reversed. So in the history of all subdivisions. So if you're a planner and you go out and you somehow get a job and you're doing plan review and you're stamping approval on cul-de-sac subdivisions, quit your job, change careers. You're not helping. So just saying. If you have any graduates of the program that are doing that, send them to me. I will talk to them. So, but with this, there's also opportunity, because one of the things that makes places auto-dependent is low density, not enough kind of spending power or critical humanity to support walk-to destination. So we tracked in the book. This is, if you get the book, you get this chart. Here's the population of the U.S. to date, and then the extra 130 million people expected to be Americans by the year 2100. So it's a 40% increase in population. Here's the rate at which we consumed land or settled land to accommodate that population. You can see they were on a similar track, and then right after the war it spiked up. We used land at 3 times the rate of population growth, and then it flattened out. So in my world, there's 2 philosophies. SIAM, which is kind of modern planning. I'll just say, if the word Hilbersheimer means anything to you, from IIT, there was modernist planning, towers in the park, Corbu, architecture infected planning and got it wrong. And then 25 years ago, the CNU, Congress for New Urbanism, explicitly was created to rebut and push back on that earlier stuff. So I don't know if that was the cause for this flattening, but in that little flattening was 5 million acres of land that wasn't settled that would otherwise have been settled. They're paved, infrastructured, all those kinds of things. And so, the question going forward is what goes on from here. So, what will we, the 130 million Americans coming, will they infill neighborhoods to make them more walkable, or will we sprawl some more? So, and I think that's a real choice. So the book sort of lays out that there's 3 choices: a hyper, a hypo, and then our ideal is no new land for settlements. We don't need it. In fact, the neighborhoods, places we've settled, are crying for more population. So from a planning standpoint, we should make it our business to figure this one out. So that was land use. And so the takeaway from that one is think about what it would take. Why is the easiest thing to sprawl? A lot of it has to do with NIMBY and exclusion and resistance to change. So hold that. So those are skill sets that I think planners can actually master. And we'll talk about that in a minute. The second one is obesity. This is what some leading developed nations spend on healthcare, and you can see the United States spends 8% of GDP more than our nearest competitor, which I think is France. So they spend about 11 or 12%, where it's something like 18 or 19%. So 1 out of $5 in the United States is spent on something medical related or health related, which is absolutely crazy. So, and it's only going up, right? And of that, we spend about 4% of it. 4% of our GDP, not just healthcare dollars, but our whole gross domestic product, 4 cents out of every dollar in America is spent treating obesity. So what is the defense budget? 3.75% of GDP. So we spend more on obesity than we do on a million-man standing army, aircraft carriers, every Blue Angels you've ever seen flying over your head, all this kind of stuff. So runaway, big time. So this is a chart again of many developed countries. The U.S. leads the world amongst larger developed countries in obesity. We're at something like 38% of adult Americans are obese, and you'll see in a minute, projected to be 50% in 12 years. 50% obese by the year 2030. So we lead the world. We have large countries, but small companies. American Samoa, for example, a lot of the Pacific Island isolated countries. I think American Samoa is 68% obese. And what's scary about it is it's yet to peak anymore. So when you're projecting these trends, you like to start with it wasn't a thing, it peaked, and now it's going down. At what rate will it go down? Nobody knows. It's never gone down. So it's still going up. So consider that, and with this kind of the possibility that we spend 4% of GDP now in 2018, we will. There's peer-reviewed studies that guarantee we'll be 50% obese there in 12 years. So what'll that be? 5 or 6% of GDP, and if the scenarios play out, some of these crazy ones, that could be 8 or 10 or 12% of GDP spent on treating obesity, a self-caused disease. So what is planning to say about all that? And then the third one, CO2, is probably the one I'm most urgent about. But they're all urgent. I think of these three, the hardest one may be sprawl. The second hardest one may be obesity, and the easiest one of these three may be CO2. But we can talk about how long it'll take. So this is, again, counting generations, generation 199 to 204. This is the carbon era. This is actual CO2, which is somehow modeled and tracked back to 1850 in the United States. And our CO2 output peaked in 2005, so that was 13 years ago. We're happy for that. But that reality obscures the fact that we basically outsourced industrial production to other countries. So China makes things for us. They own the smokestacks. Our CO2 goes down. So it's not the achievement you'd love it to be. But in my world, in the architecture world, there's an emphasis on designing net zero buildings by the year 2030. It's called the Architecture 2030 or the AIA 2030 Challenge, which is 12 years from now. So this change line, goes up to a certain point, and the policy says we should make a change that fast. We should reduce our carbon at that steep a decline. So can we do that? Don't know. So we looked in the book, we said, well, we can't answer that question, but we can answer one other, which is, what's the best we've ever done? So smoking cessation in the United States constitutes the largest public health campaign we've had, and it's been wildly successful. Cigarette smoking is an ideal data set because the cigarettes rolling machine was just invented at the turn of the 19th century. So cigarettes literally didn't exist before this. So there's lots of people who smoke things, pipes and wrapped tobacco, Lord knows what, but cigarettes were just invented right here. So in 1900, 1% of Americans smoked. In 1963, it peaked at, I think it was 43% of Americans. Interestingly enough, the Surgeon General's report came out the year after smoking peaked. I always thought, oh, that must have convinced a lot of people. No, it's after the fact. So what's that? So I'm sure industry delayed the issuance of the report a bit. But we're on a trajectory that looks something like that. That if the curve sort of goes the way we think it is, maybe around 2040 or so, we'll be down to de minimis smoking. We're down to about 17% of adult Americans smoke. Vaping technology, no one here vapes or does any of that stuff, so you wouldn't know what that was. Maybe someone has a question like, what is that? I don't know what it is, but vaping technology may delay this or complicate tracking cigarettes specifically. But memorize, if you will, visually the shape of that curve, right, and the generations involved. So here's smoking, stripped of all its data. Here's CO2 superimposed over it. So if we got CO2 out of our economy at the rate we quit smoking, we would miss our carbon targets by 5 generations or 125 years. Are we excited about this? Aren't we excited? So as planners, as human beings, you should have a basket of emotions wrapping around in your chest right now, right? Fear, uncertainty, confusion, right? I mean, am I decently close with some guesses at the emotions, right? What I'd like to do is to substitute, yeah, here's what you're really thinking. Are we totally screwed? And the answer is no. My chart set you up to think that, and I want you to think about it differently. So I don't know if anybody recognizes this graphic, but there used to be a kind of a holiday show called, what was it called? Christmas Carol. Dickens' Christmas Carol, and part of the story is Scrooge is sort of shown the future. He was a jerk, and he treated families badly, and sort of didn't think about them, didn't see how it played out, and then this ghost comes and shows in the future, and he says, can I change it? Can I change it? And yes, we think he can. So we can change it too. That chart is just a line on a page. It hasn't happened yet. But what I like to think about it is that we're finally, at the first time in history, where through data, tracking, and comparisons and so on, we sort of understand where we are. We are where we are on all these lines, how long it might take, and now we can make that a design project to change faster than we ever have. But we start, and I would just say one other thing to say. I was in Detroit, my hometown, last night, and this chart. There is one example in the United States where we absolutely pivoted on a dime, and that was World War II. So when war was declared, and this is kind of a Detroit pride story, our economy went from a peacetime economy to a wartime economy in 18 months. So if somebody said tomorrow, a president and the leading corporations and culture pivoted and said, we need to be a zero carbon economy, we could kick it out in 5 to 10 years. There's no technical barriers. It is a barrier of will, perception, framing, all those kinds of things. So here we go. So we start with the world, not the world we'd like, but the world we have. And we call this sort of the default world, not the one you would pick, it's the one you're given. And I think the next 4 slides or so are particularly pertinent for anyone interested in planning or community engagement or community involvement. And they reflect a reality I have seen for 25 years in front of public meetings, being shouted at, stalked, called names, accused of things, and often in the front of a room representing government. I'm hired by the town, I'm hired by the EPA, I'm hired by somebody to do something. Why would they be so mad at me? Well, people don't trust government. And it started you could say it started in Vietnam, it started with Nixon, it goes up and goes down. And then the last, 20 or 30 years, I think we've all seen this, there's been an active campaign on the part of right-wing political groups to discredit the work of government. And so they've changed the culture to say, a dollar spent by government is a wasted dollar, right? So that's kind of out there. So anyway, people don't trust government. So if you're a planner and you work for government, hello, how's that supposed to work? 57% of Americans know no neighbors or only a few. So 43% know more, but a majority of Americans don't know their neighbors, let's just say, or minimally. This one was a shocker. These American, outside of like religious institutions you might be a member of in the community, Americans volunteer 20 minutes a month, which is 3 hours per year, which is a long movie or a football game per year. So we think of ourselves as generous. Apparently we're not. So that was a shocker to me. And then this one is the kind of killer. This is from data from 2015 about America's greatest fears, and you can see 2 from the right is fear of dying. 30% of Americans fear that. To the right of that, 58% of Americans fear talking to strangers. Okay, so let's summarize. You don't trust government. You don't know your neighbors. And if you don't know them, you sure don't want to talk to them. Welcome to America. So you're supposed to be planning, right? Which is, you build off social cohesion in a community, you make plans going forward. WTF, or Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, is what we say in our audience, in our office. So that's kind of the reality we're designing for. So, but we want to go somewhere good, and the thesis of the book, as was nicely stated in the poster, is that I have come to believe that with this understanding that we collectively and all of our friends and all the people we can influence can set a deadline to say, let's solve all this stuff in 4 Why 4? 4 times 25 is 100. It's the maximum reasonable lifespan of a child born today. So you are making plans for someone alive. They are alive now, and they will be alive when the plan is done. Hey, stranger, how are you? They will be alive when the plan is done. So making plans for 10 generations or 20 generations, no. We don't have attention span for that. We can't recognize it, and we can't mobilize for that long. But the lifetime of a child born today, I think, is our kind of natural limit. So the book proposes a theory of change. Now, you may have come here to this talk to hear about urban design, and I will say all of this, I think, undergirds urban design. In some ways, the drawing of public spaces, getting the proportions right, having a terminal axis, and the mix of uses is the fun design stuff. This is the kind of guts and the plumbing kind of underneath. So, theory of change. Theory of change is a term of art out there. It's used a lot in the foundation community to decide whether or not people should be funded, for grants. Like if we invest money with you and your plan, will we get where we want to? So people have to prove out that they know how to do what they're doing. So, the basis of every theory of change, you have to clearly define success. When can you go out of business? When can we stop funding you? When is the mission accomplished, right? So if you have not seen one of these, this is the chart called a Gantt chart or a critical path chart. Every architecture or construction project has one. You have to lay foundations before you can build the structure, before you can put the cladding in, before you can put the roof on, before you put the drywall in, blah, blah, blah. Everything has a sequence. Something has to happen before something else. So it's all plotted out. If anything falls out of sequence, the whole thing shifts. So this idea of the clarity of success and the working back step by step of how you get there. So imagine, a lot of planning documents end up with a 4-page summary at the end that says, please implement it. And it's like, yeah, the city should do some stuff, the private sector should do some stuff. Good luck. That's kind of a lot of planning documents. It's good luck. So this is expecting, setting a higher bar for that implementation part of our plans. And so here's a kind of way that we translated it for the book, which is you start, step 1 is you define where it is, you define your status quo, where are we today? In this case, it's an example of making a neighborhood more walkable. So 12% of trips are taken on foot today. In the future, we'd like it to be 40% in 25 years. And so the process of forecasting and backcasting, back and forth, to say, well, if we know we do need to do this step, does that get us there? No, we have to do more. So this whole process is something that's trainable, and I think is really exciting to me. So in the introduction, it was mentioned that Sustainable Nation has 70 patterns. Our conceit is that they are patterns from the future. They are patterns from future-minded doers, I would say that. And then 6 accelerants, and I'm going to talk today about 3 or 4 accelerants. Perfect. Thank you. So this is the continuation of the theory of change. This is the most interesting slide I think you'll see, and the least visually interesting slide. So this is a study that we cite in the book, and it asks the question, what is the most effective way to elicit sustainable conduct? And so here's 6 methods of communication. Here's their relative. People that know statistics know what this says. I don't. But large effect is 0.8, small effect is less than 0.3. Punchline is 0.82 is the best of these 6. Social norms is sending an email. Block leader is knocking on your neighbor's door and nagging. So what do we spend most of our time doing? Sending emails. Wow, did the community turn out? Did you convince them? I don't know. I sent them all emails. You didn't do CRA, when you did those emails. So why is it that we rely on that? And guess what? It's old retail stuff. It is face-to-face. The kind of analogy I have is there's any number of TV shows that always have the naggy neighbor that's leaning over the fence bugging you about stuff. Hey, Chris, I saw you left your lawn sprinkler on overnight. That's using a lot of water. Isn't it kind of a drought period, isn't it, Chris? Okay, well, you get that talk once. Okay, I'm going to fix the damn sprinkler because I don't want to have that conversation again, right? So, but email has no such human touch to it. So why do we go about it the wrong way? The other theory of change is this idea of doing it yourself, which I'll explain in a minute, is very American. If you haven't read the book Democracy in America by de Tocqueville, in 1830s we were a do-it-yourself country. And this slide I want to spend just a minute on, and maybe I'll wrap up in just a couple minutes. But we made this chart to reflect kind of society. So at the top, this is 320 million Americans, one federal government, and then government, the pyramid of governments here, you can see there's 50 states, 3,200 counties, 28,000 municipalities. A lot of planners work for government, and I will just say there are limits to showing up and representing government and the willingness of people to follow what government says. So that's number one. Number two, a lot of people that I give these talks, and people say, Doug, I love what you said about carbon, but you know what? The government just has to lead on that. That's how it's got to go. I said, cool. I said, has that been working for you? Has that been working for you really well? Kurt, government lead, is that working for you? Yeah, I didn't think so. So, because I've been waiting 40 years for the government to lead on carbon or energy. They've done little bits, but they go in cycles. We're in a bad cycle now, but we'll be in bad cycles in the future. So assigning the starting position, the leadership position, is something you don't control, is a guarantee of passivity. I'm little powerless over little me over here till the big government asks, I can't do anything. Well, BS. So the premise of the book is the sweet spot is actually working below the smallest unit of government in small groups of people. And this is really what's fueled change forever. And so this is, in some ways, an easy sell and a hard motivator. But anyway, so which is to say, if you're going to work for government, bless you, that's great. But I'm just saying, a lot of people, government can't do everything. And in some ways, this is asking for, my definition of citizenship is that everyone be a citizen planner. Because there can't be enough physical planners. We don't have enough salary and healthcare dollars to hire enough planners. Note, I was in Detroit last night on a panel with Maurice Cox, the planning director. They've gone from a staff of 6 to a staff of 33. And I asked Maurice, how many planners would you really have here? He said, I think we need about 150. So they've quintupled their staff, and they need 3 or 4 or 5 times more. So there will never be enough planners in the room. And as you'll hear in a minute, the dynamic of being from the government makes it harder to make change. So for your consideration, all these things. And then this one. So we did a plan 3 years ago down in Tinley Park, Illinois. I'll name the place. And we did what's called an image preference survey. If you've heard of those, you show slides and you get kind of keypad polling. Do you like this? Do you not like this? And we asked, would a mixed-use building with condos be acceptable in the first neighborhood? 80% likely. Same picture, mixed-use building with rental apartments above, 20%. So it's the same building. But if people own the units, 80% support. If people rent the units, 20% support. What was going on there? Well, racism was going on there. Fear of outsiders, fear of strangers, all of it. We paused the meeting and we had a planned kind of discussion of the results. A woman that looked a lot like this stock photo stood up and said, I grew up in town. I went away to college. I moved to Wrigleyville, where I lived without a car, walked to fun, took the L to work. And then last year my mom got sick, and I had to come back to town. I'm still paying off student loans. I don't own a car, and you realize in that vote you took a minute ago, you were excluding me personally. Whoa. So then we go to neighborhood B, and we have the same slides and the same questions. So second time through the mixed-use buildings with condo, 80% support. This time, mixed-use with rental, 50. So 20% went to 50%. What had changed? This woman's testimonial. So how do you bottle empathy? And what was really going on there was, I've come to believe that when you ask an audience about change, we're wired to insert our worst fear. So in this case, it was a racist fear of outsiders, of Lord knows what, or just maybe I should bang the racist drum because I can't confirm that, but I believe that. And what happened with this woman's testimony is that her face and her experience was slid in front of people's worst fear and said, holy shit, well, yeah, that could be my neighbor, my daughter, or me, right? That's what was happening. So we've been working we've thrown out how we've always done it in the last 2 years, and this is the first question we now ask, which is, before we ask anything about design or community planning or process, we say, what's the first place you personally lived when you left your parents' house? Did you rent with roommates, rent with roommates? And over 80% of people rented with roommates. So like, when you get to the question about are renters a good thing, well, you were a renter. Then the second question we ask is, tell us about your kids. Will they be renters too? And everyone thinks their kids either are or will be renters. So we're looking for projects and laboratory experiences to run an A/B test on this. A room that's empathized and a room that's just, unwashed, whatever. So, and then in the book, we also, the next series of questions relates to a pattern in the book. Do you have any family or friends who hold these jobs? And this is the top 10 most frequently appearing job descriptions in Austin, Texas. Food prep, driver, admin, construction, and so on, organized from lowest paid to highest paid. So this is a really powerful tool. So the first question you ask is, do you have family or friends? And you could ask, did you personally have any of these jobs? That would even be probably a closer to home thing, but people don't have that many jobs in life. So we ask family or friends. And then we ask, the second question is, should people who hold these jobs have housing they can afford in your neighborhood or community? And the bell curve of who they know and the bell curve of who they say is welcome are the same curve. So back to that whole thing, if you just out of the box ask them, do they like it, they hate it. But if you lead them through a thing where, wait, this was me, this is my kids, this is my family and friends, boy, and there's a cognitive dissonance. Okay, I may still oppose rental housing, but I've now got some mixed feelings about it. So we just sort of stirred some emotions. I'll go through, how much time left? Because I do want to leave about
20 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to take 5 more and leave 15. Because I do want to cover the accelerants because I think they're relevant to the program that UIC is launching next year in urban design. So accelerants. So that chart where everyone was depressed and you said, geez, the world's, we're screwed and it's all bad. No. So these are the 6 accelerants and arguably empathetic planning, maybe 7, that we've discovered, and I just want to go through these and we'll stop there. So people know the term heuristics. There's 2 meanings for the term. One is substituting a question, a simpler question for one you can't figure out how to answer. A classic one is, what's the circumference of a circle? Well, it's pi times something. A lot of people say, well, it's multiply by 3 and then add 1. Like that's a classic heuristic, right? So you don't actually need to know 3.14, blah blah blah. The definition we're using here of heuristics is cognitive biases. Examples, things where basically we are not wired rationally. We have primitive brain functions. We distort things, all that kind of stuff. So I want to preview this. So, and when you're standing in a room full of citizens and you're being representing government or some unit of authority, you have to be respectful. You have to honor the people who showed up in that room that night. At the same time, everyone here and all those people in those rooms evolved from around a campfire in a clan or a tribal setting where survival relied on clan cohesion, us being tight with each other, supporting each other, defending each other. Some people hunted, some people defended, some people gathered food, some people grew crops, some people raised the kids, and so on and so on. So when you look out at that room full of people, think of this slide, because this was all of us. So there's 3 heuristics I'm going to talk about briefly that I think come from this early period where innovation was a really bad idea. So around the campfire, if the elders had lived to 50 or 60, 10,000 years ago, they were raging successes. Like, do whatever they did. Put away the food in the right way, organize your thing the right way. Just do what your elders say. Kept you alive. Innovation, trying new cracky stuff, no, gets you killed. Right? So here's the wiring. We're chemically wired for 50,000 years ago. So first one is loss aversion, which is this idea that the emotional pain, and emotions are chemicals communicated, through our circulatory system to our brain. So these are pleasure chemicals. So the pain, pleasure and pain chemicals. So the pain from a loss is twice as powerful as the pleasure from a gain. So if you're there and saying, hi, I'm here to change things for you, and we're going to add some density, and that's going to add some traffic, and there's going to be strangers, and blah 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 blah. You're just hammering on this loss, the pain from loss. So when it's twice as powerful, you really have to dance on the head of a pin to make that really convincing. So we can talk about that. The next one is representativeness heuristic, which you'll also see. You'll see it in the media today, where it's an echo chamber. And representativeness is the idea that you mistakenly assume that the people you are talking to, the people in your life, or the people around you, represent society at large. It's like, is that a good idea? I think so, because everybody I'm talking to thinks it's a really good idea. Well, the people you're talking to don't represent anything other than people like you, oftentimes. So and why would that be? Well, in the tribe, it made a lot of sense. Well, the elders think it's a good idea. It's kind of a suicide mission that they think is a good idea, so I'm going to go along with it. I may die, but my cohesion is there. And then this one, escalation of commitment, can be defined with one word, which is Vietnam, which is this idea that you choose a wrong course and you're incurring losses and damages from it, and you justify staying on the wrong course by saying, geez, we can't pull out of the war now. Think of how many people have died. It's never like how many people will continue to die if we don't pull out. It's, we've got to honor their loss by staying in. So anyway, we're wired to resist change. When we do change, three heuristics that say we hate change. So professional ethics. This is sprawl. You were asking what's sprawl. That's an example of sprawl. On the professional design side, this scene was designed by state licensed professionals whose license obligates them to uphold the public health, safety, and welfare. Yet I couldn't identify a place in America that is worse for the public health, safety, and welfare than this. So how is it that every sign here was designed by a state licensed professional and required a professional stamp? Every piece of roadway, every building, every parking lot, there's hundreds of state licensed professionals that collectively made this disaster. Each of which was obligated to uphold the public health, safety, and welfare. So how is it that when applied individually, it doesn't amount to anything collectively? So that's the question. So maybe we'll get to the end here. So this is a timeline from 1800 to 2050. And this just recognizes the fact that academia and apprentice professions are very slow to change. So the people who taught you were taught by people 25 years older than they are, who in turn were fighting for the new ideas of their era, which were 25 years older than that. So it wouldn't surprise me that if you track down some of the ideas that you're taught in the courses, not a bad thing, it's good to know history, but they could well be 25, 50, or 75-year-old ideas, some of which have been discredited, and in this time of needing to change within one generation are irrelevant. So this is more true for architecture, but I think it's probably a little bit true for planning. So I think I got my third accelerant. Community of pride. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip that and get to this. Campaigns. So this is a fictional character who I just love, Don Draper, who reveals in the most venal way the willingness to exploit anything emotionally to get you to do what they want. So like this one. What you call love was invented by guys like me to sell you nylons. So you think it's like romance, and it's like, no, I'm sexy or whatever. No, he's just moving product, and he's willing to mess with your emotions to get you to do it. Consider this possibility that Madison Avenue made cancer sexy. Hey, we addicted the country to a highly addictive substance, but we did so because of the identity and rugged individualism of that handsome, square-jawed Marlboro man, right? So, like, if you can sell cancer, tell me you can't get a campaign to sell all the good stuff we're talking about. So it's completely doable. So, and I think I'm going to skip through patterns are in the book. That'll just have to be another day. And I'll just close on this one. I would like to, we're starting to organize an event called National Neighborhood Days. So, you know, there are national holidays for virtually everything. Dogs, trees, mothers, daughters, children, whatever. There's a national day for everything. But neighborhoods, which I think represent some sort of fabric of how our societies are organized, not so much. So what we're proposing is a 2-day-a-year holiday, a work day in the spring and a party day in the fall. And it's inspired a little bit by Parking Day. People know Parking Day, which just happened a couple weeks ago. Cecile, it's an annual thing, third Friday in September, and people take over a parking space for a couple hours. They can put a living room there, they can put a putt-putt golf there, you can put a hammock there, you know, whatever you want. You pay for your parking space. You're not maybe not committing a crime. But I do encourage you to ask for forgiveness rather than permission, because permission is often withheld. So, and then this idea of why twice a year? Well, Americans are transient, and so particularly if you're in a rental neighborhood, as many students in this room are, next year half the people won't live there, right? So if you're trying to build any cohesion, you're doing it once a year, ain't gonna amount to much. So 1 in 6 Americans moves every year. So, and I'll close on this. Will honestly be my last slide. This idea that in designing this, so this is, you know, this idea of like the work we're doing, you know, lasts longer than a generation. What we're hoping to do here is launch a self-sustaining institution, which would have neighbors get together in the spring and do something worky, and get together in the fall and do something happy. And why would we have this idea that, you know, spring is work and fall is fun? Well, it's the agricultural cycle. So you plant in the spring, you prepare the ground, and you harvest, and you have a harvest party every fall. So there could be nothing more enduring than a pagan ritual. So we embrace the pagan in this case. And then when it comes to the modern calendar, it's funny, no one's claimed the equinoxes. So March 21st and September 21st are big days in the kind of astronomical world, and nothing on the calendar. You know, the solstices, you know, basically Christmas is basically winter solstice, 4th of July is basically summer solstice. So anyway, we've got the thing. So maybe I'll stop there and look forward to questions. How's that? Thank you. Don't be so tongue-tied.
Yep, they're coming.
So, I know that you said government is not always the best player in this, but when we look at how some economic development organizations are trying to reach and do what I like to call inclusive economic development, I noticed late. So did you talk about that at the beginning?
No, Cecile, that's a great.
Because that goes to your culture chart that you had on.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, it's here.
Yeah.
So, to what extent have you been sharing this concept with the economic development folks of the world? Not necessarily the planners, because I know you're the architect side, but the EOs that have a focus of building their communities with business, but not with community, and trying to have them shift their focus has been something I've been working on, and trying to get people to think about digging lower to the unusual suspect, because those are the people that make things happen.
Yeah.
So if you had a chance,
You are my ambassador to that.
Okay, well, we'll work on that.
Yeah, okay, we will. But I was to say, thank you for taking me back to the slide, because I kind of described the graphic at the expense of the title. And so, you know, you write a book, you want to talk about the book, you get the word out. And what I've come to believe is that the most potent change that actually ratchets and does not backslide is changing culture. Which is, what is culture? It's values. Jane Goodall describes culture as the observed behavior passed from one generation to the next. Observed behavior. So it's like, I do something some way, and the next generation watches me, literally watches me do it, and that's how they learn. And so she studied, non-human primates and observed this in the wild, that that's how they see parents teach their children. I don't think we're any different. Maybe we read it and that's a little bit observed, but cultural change is all I can hope for from this book, is to change some perceptions of what we value. Are we going to grow up to be the person that does volunteer 20 minutes a month? Is that us? If that's you, that's cool. But I'm saying there's a different choice there. So changing culture. That's why a lot of these patterns have ready, high-value propositions for government and for economic development, but I'm not starting. I think those connections will be made over time. Thanks. So I'm starting with culture change. So that's. But yeah, connect me with your work.
Well, and I would just say that I like the idea of empowering at the lower level, so that they recognize and understand how they can assist at the higher level.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
the resources, when we talk about the cities having had only 6 planners having moved to 32, but the capacity is not there to do all that they have in our task to do. But there are individuals in the community who just love their community, if given permission and empowered and direction and focus and becoming mindful.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I love that you said it that way. The thing I would rather give them is forgiveness, not permission. Because I think just those folks that said, Doug, I love what you're saying on carbon, that government has to lead. Check that. You aren't saying that, and I'm not saying that, but like when I hear that now, it's like check your thought. Analyze what you just said. There's a higher authority that is constraining you from being a good citizen or acting on your self-interest in organizing with your neighbors to make your block better, your street better, whatever. And a lot of it has to do with rules. And planners create a ton of rules. And so we're involved in our planning practice, zoning practice, this idea of rule-free zones. Just get the rules out of the way, or make it really clear that you're on your own here and we don't require a permit, but don't do something stupid. That's humans are okay. A couple more. Yeah.
I just want to quickly mention something I've heard last week. Actually, we had a conference here on campus participate. There were people from all around the world, and some of the notes that you have there, how long it might take to actually. We have enough space already within the built environment to densify. There's a place on earth country called Switzerland, where they're actually doing it. It's a small country, and it's not really space for the sake of saving only space. It's all the other social, environmental consequences. But they actually, I was actually almost in a state of shock. They instituted a law, a planning control, basically. I know you're saying maybe we don't need the controls, but they actually literally say they have established the criteria, the kind of set the level and say if until we reach this density, nobody can get a permit to build outside. And I asked the first question is, what if it's all built out at some density? They said they have to densify, and it's happened. It's I don't know. Again, it is possible, but they do work with the neighbors. All the things, or many of the things you were mentioning, to have a feeling of what is the game. Because the fear is there, even in Switzerland, where maybe even in smaller villages where people are maybe comfortable, they're still afraid of many of the consequences of more dense environment. So they work with the neighbors, and so it's really just kind of an illustration that it is possible in some other places. Seems like utopian almost here in the U.S., but it's actually happening.
It does.
I don't want to take too much time.
We have a
few more minutes, maybe another question or two.
Anybody else?
The comment.
Chris, go.
I actually had an interesting meeting last week with a delegation from Ukraine, and there were these young planners that were visiting Chicago, and they were sort of, impressed with all the things that we've done in the city, but they had a really tough time trying to change how their government operates and how they could sort of adopt a lot of these things that are going on here in the U.S. And I said, well, understand it takes a long time and a lot of people fighting. So the idea of permission is actually more interesting to me, because I think they couldn't quite make the change with the government because things were always happening the way it has been, since communism. And I said, a lot of the change happened through community groups and groups that have an interest. Maybe they were suffering environmentally, or they wanted something, and so that sort of really drove the changes and made people want these things that we have now. It doesn't happen in 10 years. It takes a long time, but you need to basically invest in that to make sure you make those changes to new.
Thanks, Chris. I was gonna, maybe we're towards the end, so I could make one point and then summarize. So this is one of the patterns which I'm sure is a trend that's known to all of you, tactical urbanism. And it's this idea of, here's a kind of forlorn patch of sidewalk, and here's that same patch of sidewalk with a coat of paint on the paving and a little parklet and some activity, right? So you could organize this in a few weeks' time. Getting a permit for it may take years. So I just say do it, and what is the harm you've done? So we did, with the City of Chicago in 2017 down on 75th Street in Chatham, something called Dining on the Five. And it was basically, it was this, but it went 2 or 3 blocks. And we only got a permit after we'd already built it. So we were opening up, the paint was drying, and then the guy came from City Hall and said, here's your permit. So, but that was just Alderman Sawyer kind of pressuring people. So, but it was a one-off, it wasn't a program. So, but no harm was done. It was the best thing that happened. I think that's summer on 75th Street. And we made it possible because we got the permit, but we had already committed to do it anyway. So I'm just saying that's, this is, when you think about this, Goodall's definition of culture being the passing on of observed behavior from one generation to the next. Look at, wow, hey, the perception here is that in a month, you can really transform a place. And the 50-year or the 100-year version of the unwalkable America, 6/7 unwalkable America, if you actually took the kind of suburban retrofit approach, how many trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars would it cost us to do the physical retrofit, to take that worst sprawl photograph I showed you into a walkable place? We don't have the money. We aren't wealthy enough. We don't have the time. We're not going to do that. So we have to make community, even in places that are human disasters, human sacrifice sites. And I'll close with this one, which is probably the most insightful thing I learned writing the book. The person who is behind heuristics, the term heuristics, is a Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist named Daniel Kahneman. And he wrote a best-selling book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And you can, it can be the second book you buy. First one is Sustainable Nation, second one is Thinking Fast and Slow. And he is...
Yours is less thick. This is really thick.
Yeah, right. Yeah, fewer pages than ours. So, but he was asked, he's this guy that understands how weirdly our brains are wired. And somebody said, well, Daniel, what's your advice on how you get people to change their behavior? He said, that's a stupid question. I would never ask it that way. The way I pose it, he said, is if what you want them to do is such a good idea, ask yourself, why aren't they doing it already? And that take away time, word, time, and that little insight. And another talk I give is for architects and wanting to ask the question, why isn't every building in Chicago a net zero building? Everyone knows it should be, so why isn't it? Architects don't want to do it. Building owners don't want to do it. The code doesn't require it. It's perceived as expensive. You make a list of 1,000 reasons. But the one thing that is in our power to control is the wanting it. And so that's why I say when I focus on culture, it was not to put government in the doghouse or overlook its power to take up these ideas and act on them. It was much more this idea of like the seed you plant in the heart and soul of the young person and why they do their work and what they hope to achieve from it. I think that's the most powerful thing you can do in a kind of conversation in a book. So that's that insight of just instilling in people the desire to want to do it, to want to be a great citizen, to want to have a good neighborhood day, and wherever they live, twice a year. If it isn't in my neighborhood, I move there. It's like I'm organizing this. There's a vacant lot. It's a mess. We're cleaning that. That's our work day. We're doing that, and in the fall, I'm growing some rocks. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. But that's the great thing. So thank you for your time. I'll hang out for a while. Can we have this room for a little bit? And do you want to say any closing, anything?
Yeah. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. This is really a nice event to signify to some extent the kind of the beginning of our series that relate to city design and the launching of our degree in the fall of 2019. I'd like to acknowledge Sanjeev Vidyarthi, who is the director of the upcoming program. And again, it's that concern, but it's not. It's a way to try to marry the concerns that the planners deal with and issues and challenges with the design. And I think your presentation really illustrates that combination. It's really not only about physical, but connecting the social, the neighborhood, the understanding, the human understanding and connection that we need, and commitment to actually make things happen and make our quality of life and our places being better, again, not just for the physical side, but actually being better in all respects. Yeah. So thank you for that, and thank you all for coming. I don't know if there's any other statement to be shared, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I guess we are good. Thanks, Teresa, for co-hosting this with UPP, and thank you everyone for coming out.
Thank you.